Behind the golden gates of palace, where every smile is practiced and every gesture calculated, a secret has been growing like poison in the royal bloodline. For months, palace staff have whispered in darkened corridors about strange incidents involving the young Princess Charlotte. Mysterious falls, unexplained accidents, and a child who once sparkled with joy now walking with downcast eyes. What the world doesn't know is that one man has been watching, documenting, and waiting for the right moment to speak. Royal Protection Officer James has served the crown for 15 years, sworn to protect the royal family with his life. But what happens when the greatest threat to a royal child comes from within the very walls he's meant to guard? The truth is about to reveal will shake the monarchy to its core, expose a web of manipulation that reaches the highest levels of the royal household, and show how a brave 8-year-old princess became the unlikely hero in her own story of survival. This is not just another palace scandal. This is the story of how power, jealousy, and calculated cruelty nearly destroyed an innocent child, and how courage in its smallest and most unexpected form saved the future of the British crown. Royal Protection Officer James adjusted his earpiece as he took his position outside the private dining room of Clarence's house. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors where he had stood guard for countless royal meals over the past 15 years. Today felt different, though he couldn't quite place why. Inside the dining room, 8-year-old Princess Charlotte sat at the polished mahogany table, her small hands folded neatly in her lap as she waited for her queen to join her for their weekly breakfast. These private meetings had begun 6 months ago, shortly after King Charles had suggested that spend more individual time with each of the to strengthen family bonds. Had initially thought it was a lovely gesture. The young princess had always been spirited and confident, often seen laughing and playing with her brothers Prince George and Prince Louis. Her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, had raised her to be independent and strong-willed, qualities that had charmed the public during her rare official appearances. But something had changed in recent months. Noticed at first in small details, the way Charlotte's shoulders seemed to slump when she walked, how her bright smile appeared less frequently, and the way she had started flinching slightly when adults raised their voices, even in normal conversation. As a trained protection officer, was skilled at reading body language and detecting threats, but these changes in Charlotte troubled him in ways he couldn't initially articulate. The dining room door opened, and Queen entered with her characteristic purposeful stride. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her demeanor as composed as always. Had worked with many members of the royal family over the years, and had always struck him as efficient and professional in her approach to royal duties. "Good morning, Charlotte," said, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had become her signature since becoming queen consort. "I trust you slept well." Couldn't see Charlotte's face from his position, but he heard her quiet response. "Yes, Your Majesty, thank you for asking." As the breakfast progressed, found himself paying closer attention to the conversation than he normally would during his security duties. Royal Protection officers were trained to be observant but discreet, to see everything while appearing to notice nothing. However, the tone of the conversation inside began to concern him. "Charlotte, your mother tells me you've been having difficulty with your posture during public events," his voice carried through the door. "A future queen must always present herself with perfect bearing. Slouching is not acceptable for someone of your position." Frowned slightly. He had been present at Charlotte's recent public appearances, and her posture had seemed perfectly appropriate for a child her age. In fact, he remembered thinking how well she had carried herself during the Easter service at Windsor Castle just 2 weeks earlier. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," came Charlotte's small voice. "I'll try to do better." "Trying isn't sufficient, Charlotte. You must succeed. Your great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, never allowed herself even a moment of poor posture. She understood that every gesture, every expression, every movement was being watched and judged. You seem to forget this fundamental truth far too often." His jaw tightened slightly. He had served during Queen Elizabeth II's final years, and while she had indeed maintained impeccable standards, she had also shown remarkable warmth and understanding toward her great. The comparison being drawn seemed unnecessarily harsh for an 8-year-old child. The conversation continued in this pattern throughout the meal. His voice remained steady and controlled, but her words carried weight that seemed disproportionate to Charlotte's age and experience. Found himself remembering Charlotte as she had been a year ago, confident, playful, quick to laugh and engage with the palace staff who adored her. The contrast with the quiet, subdued child he was hearing now was stark. "Your mathematics tutor informs me that your progress has been slower than expected," continued. "Intelligence runs in the royal bloodline, Charlotte, but it must be cultivated through discipline and hard work. I wonder sometimes if your parents have been too lenient with your education." Knew this criticism was unfair. He had occasionally overheard Charlotte's tutoring sessions, and the child was remarkably bright and engaged with her studies. Her parents had worked hard to provide her with an education that balanced academic excellence with age-appropriate expectations. "I've been working very hard on my mathematics, Your Majesty," Charlotte replied, and detected a slight tremor in her voice. "Perhaps I could have additional tutoring sessions if you think that would help." "Additional sessions wouldn't address the fundamental issue, Charlotte. The problem isn't the amount of time spent studying, it's your lack of natural aptitude. Some people are simply not blessed with the intellectual gifts necessary for leadership. It's not your fault, of course, but it is something you must acknowledge and work around." Felt his protective instincts flaring. In his years of service, he had learned to read the subtle dynamics of royal relationships, and what he was hearing troubled him deeply. This wasn't constructive guidance or even firm discipline. This was systematic undermining of a child's confidence and self-worth. The breakfast concluded with its usual formal farewell, and prepared himself to escort Charlotte back to her parents' apartment. When the dining room door opened, he was shocked by the change in the young princess's appearance. Her face was pale, her eyes seemed unusually bright as if fighting back tears, and her usual animated energy had been replaced by a careful, controlled demeanor that seemed far too mature for her 8 years. "Ready to return to your parents, Your Highness?" asked gently, offering her the warm smile that had always earned him grins in return. Charlotte nodded silently and began walking beside him through the corridors of Clarence's house. Normally, these walks were filled with Charlotte's chatter about her lessons, her pets, or her plans for the day. Today, she walked in complete silence, her small feet making barely any sound on the marble floors. As they approached the entrance where Charlotte's personal protection officer waited to escort her back to Kensington Palace, made a decision that would eventually change everything. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "if you ever need anything, or if anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable, please know that you can speak to any of your protection officers. We're here to keep you safe in every way." Charlotte looked up at him with eyes that seemed much older than her 8 years. For a moment, he thought she might say something, but instead she simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you, officer." That afternoon, returned to his duties with a heavy heart and a growing sense of unease. He had witnessed something that troubled him professionally and personally, but he wasn't sure how to proceed. Royal protection officers maintained strict confidentiality about family matters, and interfering in internal royal relationships was explicitly forbidden. However, his training had also taught him to recognize signs of emotional distress and potential harm. Over the following weeks, began paying closer attention to Charlotte's behavior and demeanor after her private meetings with. The pattern became increasingly clear and concerning. After each breakfast, Charlotte appeared more withdrawn, more careful in her movements, and less likely to engage in the spontaneous, joyful behavior that had previously defined her personality. Also noticed that Charlotte had begun asking unusual questions of the palace staff. She inquired about proper etiquette for situations she had never encountered, sought reassurance about her appearance before minor events, and seemed constantly worried about making mistakes. Most troubling of all, she had stopped laughing, really laughing, in the way children should. One particularly difficult morning, overheard Charlotte quietly crying in a bathroom near the dining room after one of her meetings with. The sound of muffled sobs from such a young child struck him like a physical blow. He waited nearby, hoping she would emerge and perhaps speak to him. But when she finally came out, her face had been carefully composed, and she walked past him with the kind of controlled dignity that no 8-year-old should have to master. Realized that his concerns were growing beyond his ability to handle alone, but he also understood the delicate nature of his position. He couldn't simply approach Charlotte's parents without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, and he couldn't violate his professional obligations without being certain that serious harm was occurring. However, he also couldn't continue to stand by and watch a child's spirit being systematically destroyed. That evening made the first entry in what would become a detailed private journal documenting his observations. He recorded dates, times, Charlotte's behavior before and after meetings, and specific changes he noticed in her demeanor and confidence. He wasn't sure yet how this information might be used, but his instincts told him that creating a record was important. As weeks turned into months, his documentation grew more detailed and more troubling. He observed Charlotte becoming increasingly anxious before her meetings often asking her personal protection officers if her dress was appropriate or if her hair looked neat enough. She had developed nervous habits like twisting her hands together and checking her reflection in windows and mirrors throughout the palace. Most concerning of all, began to notice that Charlotte was experiencing what appeared to be small accidents and injuries with unusual frequency. She would arrive at events with unexplained bruises on her arms, claiming she had bumped into furniture. She would miss activities due to headaches or stomach problems that seemed to coincide with her scheduled time On several occasions, she appeared to have been crying, though when asked. His training told him that these could be signs of various forms of distress, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Charlotte, once the most confident and spirited of the royal, was transforming into a nervous, careful child who seemed constantly afraid of making mistakes. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. Was positioned outside the dining room as usual when he heard Charlotte's voice rise in what sounded like distress. Unable to ignore what might be a safety issue, he moved closer to the door and heard Charlotte saying, "Please, Your Majesty, I promise I'll do better. I don't want to disappoint anyone anymore." His response was measured but cold. "Charlotte, disappointment is something you'll need to become accustomed to. Not everyone can live up to the standards required of royal leadership. Perhaps it would be better if you focused on supporting your brother George rather than trying to compete with him for attention and prominence." Felt his hands clench into fists. The implication that Charlotte was somehow competing inappropriately with her older brother, or that she was seeking attention rather than simply being herself, struck him as particularly cruel. Charlotte had always been supportive of her brothers and had never shown signs of inappropriate rivalry or attention-seeking behavior. When Charlotte emerged from the dining room that morning, saw tears in her eyes that she was desperately trying to hide. Her small hands were shaking slightly, and she walked with the careful, controlled steps of someone trying very hard not to break down completely. That night made a decision that would ultimately lead to one of the biggest revelations in modern royal history. He reached out to Sarah, a trusted colleague who had served as a senior protection officer for the Princess of Wales. Sarah had known Charlotte since birth and had always been particularly fond of the spirited little princess. Arranged to meet Sarah privately, away from the palace, and shared his growing concerns about Charlotte's welfare. Sarah listened carefully to his observations and admitted that she had noticed similar changes in Charlotte's behavior, but had attributed them to the normal challenges of growing up in the royal spotlight. Together, they decided to carefully monitor the situation and document any further concerning incidents. They agreed that if their fears proved justified, they would need to find a way to bring the matter to the attention of Charlotte's parents without violating their professional obligations or putting Charlotte at further risk. Neither nor Sarah could have predicted that within weeks, Charlotte herself would provide them with the evidence they needed in the most dramatic and courageous way possible. The brave little princess was about to take a stand that would expose the truth and change everything. The morning of November 15th began like any other for Royal Protection Officer James, but it would end with revelations that would shake the very foundations of the royal household. Had arrived at Clarence's house early, reviewing his notes from the previous weeks, and preparing himself mentally for another difficult morning watching Princess Charlotte endure what had become increasingly troubling interactions with Queen. Charlotte arrived precisely on time, as she had learned to do over the past months, observed her carefully as she approached the dining room. The 8-year-old princess moved with the measured steps of someone much older, her hands clasped behind her back in a formal posture that seemed unnatural for a child her age. Her face, once animated and full of curiosity, wore an expression of careful neutrality that found heartbreaking. "Good morning, officer," Charlotte said quietly as she approached. Her voice carried none of the warmth and playfulness that had once characterized her interactions with the palace staff. "Good morning, Your Highness," replied, offering her an encouraging smile. "I hope you have a pleasant breakfast." Charlotte nodded politely but said nothing more. Noticed that she appeared to be carrying something small in her hand, what looked like a tiny recording device that she quickly slipped into her dress pocket. The movement was so subtle and quick that almost missed it, but his trained eye for detail caught the gesture. Felt his pulse quicken. If Charlotte was indeed carrying a recording device, it suggested that the young princess had taken matters into her own hands in a way that was both impressive and deeply concerning. An 8-year-old child should never feel the need to secretly record conversations with family members, and the fact that Charlotte had apparently made this decision spoke volumes about the severity of whatever was happening during these private breakfasts. Queen arrived shortly after, her demeanor as composed and authoritative as always. She greeted Charlotte with formal politeness, and they entered the dining room together. Took his usual position outside the door, but today he found himself listening more intently than ever, knowing that whatever happened inside might finally provide the evidence needed to understand and address Charlotte's distress. The breakfast began with typical formalities, but could sense an unusual tension in Charlotte's voice when she responded to questions. There was a quality to her words that suggested nervousness mixed with determination, as if she was preparing herself for something significant. "Charlotte, I've been speaking with your tutors about your progress," began, her tone carrying the familiar note of criticism that had become routine. "I'm afraid the reports continue to be disappointing. Your French pronunciation remains inadequate, your mathematical reasoning shows little improvement, and your comportment during lessons suggests a lack of serious commitment to your education." Frowned as he listened. He knew from conversations with other palace staff that Charlotte's tutors had actually been quite pleased with her progress and had frequently commented on her quick understanding and genuine enthusiasm for learning. The disconnect between reality and characterization of Charlotte's academic performance was striking. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Charlotte replied, but there was something different in her voice today, a steadiness that hadn't been there in previous weeks. "Could you please tell me exactly what my tutors said? I'd like to understand their concerns so I can address them properly." Raised his eyebrows slightly. This was the first time he had heard Charlotte question or seek clarification about criticism during these breakfasts. Previously, she had simply accepted whatever negative assessment was offered and apologized for her perceived failures. There was a pause before responded, and when she did, her tone had sharpened slightly. "Charlotte, it's not appropriate for you to question the feedback you receive from your elders. Your role is to listen, accept guidance, and improve your performance. This tendency to challenge authority is precisely the kind of behavior that concerns everyone around you." "I wasn't trying to challenge anyone, Your Majesty," Charlotte said, her voice remaining surprisingly calm. "I just want to make sure I understand correctly so I can do better. My tutors usually tell me different things about my work, so I'm confused about what I need to fix." Felt a surge of pride at Charlotte's measured response. Despite months of apparent emotional pressure, the young princess was demonstrating remarkable composure and intelligence in seeking clarity about the contradictory messages she was receiving. His response came quickly and with noticeable irritation. "Charlotte, this is exactly what I mean about your problematic attitude. You're suggesting that I'm lying about what your tutors have told me. This kind of disrespectful behavior is completely unacceptable from someone in your position." "No, Your Majesty, I would never suggest that," Charlotte replied, but detected the slightest tremor in her voice now. "I just know that Mr. told me yesterday that my French pronunciation had improved significantly, and Miss Williams said my mathematics work was excellent last week. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just confused about why there seem to be different opinions about my progress." Realized that Charlotte was being far more strategic than anyone might have expected from an 8-year-old child. She was carefully presenting factual information while maintaining respectful language, and in doing so, she was exposing the inconsistencies in the criticism being directed at her. It was an impressive display of intelligence and courage under pressure. The conversation continued in this pattern, with making increasingly harsh assessments of Charlotte's behavior, appearance, and abilities, while Charlotte responded with careful questions and gentle corrections based on her actual experiences. Found himself amazed by the young princess's composure and impressed by her clear thinking in what must have been an extremely stressful situation. "Your parents have expressed concerns about your emotional stability," Charlotte said at one point. "They worry that you're becoming too sensitive and unable to handle constructive criticism. This weakness of character is something that must be addressed if you're ever to fulfill your royal duties effectively." His jaw tightened. He had been present during many interactions between Charlotte and her parents, and he had never observed them expressing concerns about her emotional stability. In fact, they had frequently praised their daughter's resilience and maturity. "Could you help me understand what my parents said specifically?" Charlotte asked. "I'd like to talk with them about their concerns so we can work together to address any problems." "Charlotte, the fact that you continue to question what you're being told proves exactly what everyone is worried about," snapped. "This argumentative attitude and inability to accept feedback gracefully is precisely why everyone finds you so difficult to work with." Notice that language was becoming increasingly harsh and personal. The shift from constructive criticism to personal attacks was clear and troubling. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said, and could hear that she was starting to sound upset, but she pressed on. "I don't think I'm being argumentative. I'm just trying to understand so I can improve. Could you please tell me who has said they find me difficult to work with? I'd like to apologize to them and ask how I can do better." The question seemed to catch off guard, and there was a longer pause before she responded. "Charlotte, it's not appropriate for you to demand names or details about private conversations. The fact that you would ask such questions shows exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior that concerns everyone." Realized that Charlotte had skillfully backed into a corner. By asking for specific information and names, she was exposing the fact that these alleged complaints might not actually exist. It was a remarkably sophisticated approach for someone so young. The breakfast continued with Charlotte maintaining her respectful but persistent questioning, whilst responses became increasingly defensive and harsh. Found himself torn between admiration for Charlotte's courage and concern for the emotional toll this confrontation must be taking on her. Near the end of the meal, heard Charlotte say something that made him step closer to the door. "Your Majesty, I've been thinking about everything you've told me over these past months, and I want to make sure I understand correctly. Are you saying that my parents, my tutors, and the palace staff all think I'm disappointing and difficult?" "Yes, Charlotte," Came's sharp reply. "I know it's hard to hear, but everyone around you has expressed serious concerns about your behavior, your abilities, and your attitude. I've been trying to help you understand these problems so you can begin to address them." His heart broke for Charlotte, but he was also amazed by what happened next. Instead of breaking down or apologizing as she had in previous weeks, Charlotte's voice became clear and strong. "Your Majesty, I think there might be some misunderstanding somewhere, because that's not what those people tell me directly. My parents tell me they're proud of me, my tutors say I'm doing well, and the staff members are always kind to me. I think maybe someone isn't telling the truth about what other people are saying." The silence that followed was deafening. Realized that Charlotte had just directly challenged the foundation of months of psychological manipulation, and she had done so with remarkable clarity and courage. When finally responded, her voice was cold with anger. "Charlotte, how dare you suggest that I would lie to you? This level of disrespect and defiance is absolutely unacceptable. You clearly have no understanding of your position or your responsibilities to this family." "I'm not trying to be disrespectful," Charlotte said, and could hear tears in her voice now, but she continued. "I just think someone is confused about what people are really saying about me. Maybe if we all talk together, we could figure out where the confusion is coming from." Realized that Charlotte was offering a solution that would expose the truth. A group conversation where all parties could speak directly rather than having their words filtered through. It was a brilliant suggestion that demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence. His response was swift and harsh. "Charlotte, there will be no such conversation. The fact that you would suggest such a thing shows how completely inappropriate your thinking has become. You clearly cannot accept guidance or criticism, and this defiant attitude will not be tolerated any longer." The breakfast ended abruptly with angry departure, leaving Charlotte alone in the dining room. Waited several minutes before the door opened, and when Charlotte emerged, he was prepared for tears or distress. Instead, he found a little girl who looked emotionally drained but surprisingly determined. "Officer," Charlotte said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, Your Highness." Charlotte looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for her 8 years. "If someone was saying things about me that weren't true, and it was making me feel very sad and confused, what should I do?" Felt his heart race. This was the moment he had been hopping for and dreading. Charlotte was finally ready to seek help, but the situation was far more delicate than he had imagined. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "if someone is saying untrue things that are hurting you, the most important thing is to talk to people you trust, like your parents. They love you very much and want to protect you." Charlotte nodded slowly. "I think I'm ready to do that now," she said. "I think I have enough information to help them understand what's been happening." Realized that Charlotte was referring to whatever she had recorded during the breakfast. The young princess had apparently conducted her own investigation, gathered evidence, and was now prepared to present her case to her parents. It was an extraordinary display of courage and intelligence that would soon change everything for the royal family. As escorted Charlotte from Clarence's house that morning, he knew that the truth was finally about to come to light. The brave little princess had faced her tormentor with remarkable strength and had gathered the evidence needed to expose months of psychological manipulation. The revelation would shock the royal household and demonstrate that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. The revelation came just 3 days after Charlotte's courageous confrontation with Queen, and it unfolded in a way that no one in the royal household could have anticipated. Royal Protection Officer James was completing his afternoon shift when he received an urgent message to report to Kensington Palace immediately. The tone of the summons suggested something significant was happening, but could never have prepared himself for what he was about to witness. When arrived at Kensington Palace, he was escorted directly to the private study of the Prince of Wales. The atmosphere in the corridors was tense, with staff members speaking in hushed whispers and moving with the kind of careful urgency that suggested a serious family crisis was unfolding. Inside the study, found Prince William and Princess seated together on a sofa, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and determination that he had never seen before. Princess Charlotte sat in an armchair nearby, looking small but remarkably composed for a child who had just exposed one of the most shocking scandals in recent royal history. "Officer," Prince William said, rising to greet him, "please sit down. We need to discuss some very serious matters that have come to our attention regarding Charlotte's welfare." Took a seat, his heart racing as he realized that the moment he had both hoped for and dreaded had finally arrived. The truth was about to be revealed, and the consequences would likely be far-reaching for everyone involved. "Charlotte has shared some very disturbing information with us about her private meetings with Queen," Princess began, her voice carefully controlled, but filled with emotion. "She's also provided us with audio recordings of these meetings that paint a picture of systematic psychological abuse that we are struggling to comprehend." Felt a mixture of relief and concern wash over him. Relief that Charlotte had finally spoken to her parents about her ordeal, but concern about the implications of what was being revealed. Charlotte looked at with eyes that seemed much older than her 8 years. "Officer," she said quietly, "I think you noticed that something was wrong during my breakfasts with Queen. I saw how you looked at me afterward, and I could tell you were worried about me." Nodded carefully. "I did notice some changes in your demeanor, Your Highness. I was concerned about your—" Prince William leaned forward in his chair. "Charlotte has told us that you were always kind to her after these difficult meetings, and that you once told her she could speak to her protection officers if anyone ever made her feel uncomfortable. She says that conversation helped her realize she needed to take action to protect herself." Felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. Charlotte had indeed taken action to protect herself, but the fact that an 8-year-old child had felt compelled to do so was heartbreaking. Princess activated a small recording device on the coffee table. "Charlotte recorded her final breakfast with 3 days ago. We'd like you to listen to this, both as a witness to Charlotte's recent behavior and as a professional who understands the dynamics of royal protection and family relationships." The recording began to play, and immediately recognized the voices and setting from that difficult morning. However, hearing the conversation played back in its entirety was even more shocking than his limited observations from outside the door had suggested. His voice came through clearly. "Charlotte, everyone around you has expressed serious concerns about your behavior, your abilities, and your attitude. I've been trying to help you understand these problems so you can begin to address them." Winced as he heard the words again, knowing now that Charlotte's parents were listening to their daughter, being told that everyone in her life found her disappointing and problematic. Charlotte's young voice responded with remarkable composure. Your Majesty, I think there might be some misunderstanding somewhere, because that's not what those people tell me directly. My parents tell me they're proud of me, my tutors say I'm doing well, and the staff members are always kind to me. I think maybe someone isn't telling the truth about what other people are saying. Prince William's jaw tightened as he listened to his daughter respectfully, but firmly challenging the false narrative being constructed about her life and relationships. The recording continued with angry response. Charlotte, how dare you suggest that I would lie to you? This level of disrespect and defiance is absolutely unacceptable. Watched Princess's face as she listened to her daughter being berated for seeking the truth. The princess's hands were clenched in her lap, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears of anger and heartbreak. When the recording ended, the study fell into silence. Realized he had been holding his breath during much of the playback, and he could see that Charlotte's parents were struggling to process what they had heard. This recording represents just one conversation, Prince William said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. Charlotte has told us that similar interactions have been happening weekly for over 6 months. She's described a pattern of psychological manipulation, false accusations, and systematic undermining of her confidence and self-worth. Nodded grimly. Your Royal Highness, I've been documenting my observations about Princess Charlotte's behavior and demeanor after these meetings for several months. I was increasingly concerned about her emotional, but I wasn't certain how to proceed given the sensitive nature of the family relationships involved. Princess turned to with an expression of gratitude mixed with sadness. We understand your position was extremely difficult. We're grateful that you were observant and caring enough to notice that something was wrong. Charlotte has told us that your kindness during this difficult period helped her feel less alone. Charlotte spoke up from her chair. Officer, I want you to know that I wasn't trying to cause trouble for anyone. I just started recording because I wanted to understand why I felt so confused and sad after my breakfasts. I thought maybe if I could listen to the conversations again, I could figure out what I was doing wrong and how to fix it. His heart broke at the innocence in Charlotte's explanation. She had initially approached the situation not as a victim seeking evidence of abuse, but as a child trying to understand and improve her own behavior. But when I listened to the recordings, Charlotte continued, I realized that the things Queen was telling me about what other people said weren't true. So I decided to ask her more questions to see if I could understand where the confusion was coming from. Prince William reached over and took his daughter's hand. Charlotte, you were incredibly brave to stand up for yourself the way you did. You should never have been put in a position where you needed to defend yourself against lies and manipulation, but you handled it with remarkable courage and intelligence. Marveled at how Charlotte had approached her situation with such strategic thinking and emotional maturity. Her decision to gather evidence and seek clarification had exposed the truth in a way that protected her while revealing the systematic nature of what had been happening to her. Officer, Princess said, we'd like to ask you to provide us with your written observations about Charlotte's behavior and any concerns you documented during this period. We're preparing to address this situation at the highest levels, and your professional assessment will be valuable. Nodded immediately. Of course, Your Royal Highness. I've maintained detailed notes about my observations, and I'd be honored to provide them to help protect Princess Charlotte. Over the following week, worked closely with Charlotte's parents and their senior advisors to compile a comprehensive account of what had transpired during Charlotte's private meetings with Queen. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of psychological manipulation that had been carefully hidden from the rest of the royal family. The recordings Charlotte had made revealed a pattern of behavior that went far beyond stern guidance, had systematically undermined Charlotte's confidence, created false narratives about how others perceived her, and engaged in what child psychology experts would later describe as emotional abuse designed to break down a child's sense of self-worth and independence. Most shocking of all was the discovery that had been lying about conversations with Charlotte's parents, tutors, and palace staff. When Prince William and Princess spoke directly with these individuals, they found that everyone had nothing but positive things to say about Charlotte's progress, behavior, and character. The negative assessments that had claimed to be sharing were entirely fabricated. The revelation sent shockwaves through the royal household. King Charles was reportedly devastated to learn that his wife had engaged in such behavior toward his granddaughter, and emergency meetings were convened to determine how to address the situation while minimizing damage to the monarchy's reputation. Found himself playing a crucial role in these discussions, as his professional observations and detailed documentation provided important corroboration for Charlotte's account of what had occurred. His willingness to speak up about his concerns, despite the professional risks involved, was praised by Charlotte's parents and senior palace officials. The resolution came swiftly once the full extent of his behavior was understood. Queen's access to the was immediately suspended, and she was required to undergo professional counseling before any future contact would be considered. Her public duties were quietly reduced, and she was effectively removed from any roles involving interactions with children or vulnerable individuals. Most importantly, Charlotte began receiving support from child psychologists who specialized in helping young people recover from emotional manipulation and psychological abuse. Her natural resilience and the strong foundation of love and support from her parents helped her begin the healing process, but the impact of her experience would require ongoing attention and care. Continued in his role as a royal protection officer, but his relationship with the family had evolved into something deeper than professional duty. Charlotte's parents recognized that his observance and concern had played a vital role in uncovering the truth, and they made sure he knew how grateful they were for his vigilance and courage in a difficult situation. Several months later, was working a routine shift when Charlotte approached him with a bright smile that reminded him of the spirited little girl he had first met years earlier. The confident, playful child was gradually returning, though she would always carry the wisdom gained from her difficult experience. "Officer," she said, "I wanted to thank you for being someone I could trust when I really needed it. I know you were trying to help me even when you couldn't say anything directly." Smiled back at her. "Your Highness, you showed incredible courage and strength during a very difficult time. You protected yourself and probably protected other children who might have faced similar treatment in the future. I'm proud to know you." Charlotte's experience became a turning point for the royal family's approach to child protection and family dynamics. New protocols were established to ensure that children's welfare would be monitored more carefully, and that there would always be trusted adults available to listen if young family members needed support. The scandal was managed carefully by the palace communications team, with the public being told only that Queen had stepped back from certain duties due to health considerations. The full truth remained within the family, but the lessons learned from Charlotte's ordeal led to important changes in how the royal household prioritized the emotional of its youngest members. Often reflected on the case in the years that followed, marveling at how a brave 8-year-old princess had exposed a dangerous situation and protected herself through intelligence, courage, and careful planning. Charlotte had proven that even in the most privileged and protected environments, children could face serious challenges, but that with the right support and their own inner strength, they could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. The truth that revealed about Charlotte's ordeal became a defining moment in modern royal history, not just because of the shocking behavior it exposed, but because of the remarkable courage shown by a young child who refused to accept treatment she knew was wrong. In standing up to manipulation, Charlotte had not only protected herself, but had also demonstrated the kind of strength and integrity that would serve her well in whatever royal duties awaited her in the future.